The evening sky was a patchwork of deep oranges and pale blues, with a faint trace of light that lingered long after the sun had sunk behind the hills. The studio was quiet, the soft hum of the equipment the only sound that filled the space. It was a simple room, the walls lined with vintage records, guitars leaning casually against a worn leather couch, and a coffee table cluttered with half-empty mugs and papers. There was a faint smell of fresh coffee in the air, but it was already growing stale as time stretched into the late hours. Tom had been working alone for hours, the rhythmic beats of his latest track reverberating through the room. He was a sound engineer, a shadow behind the scenes, tweaking and adjusting the music of artists who would later take the stage. But tonight, it wasn't just any artist. It was a track he had been asked to remix. Something special, something secret. The name on the file had sent a chill down his spine when he first saw it. Avicii True Stories. He had heard the rumors, of course. Everyone in the industry had. The whispers about Tim Bergling's sudden death, about the eerie things that surrounded the last months of his life. There were always stories, but Tom had never put much stock into them. That is, until now. As he listened to the track, something felt wrong. It wasn't the mix. It was the vibe, the sense of melancholy that was almost palpable, as if the music itself was alive, breathing, aching. The screen flickered as Tom adjusted the EQ, a low hum coming from the speakers. The sound didn't match the notes on the screen. It was as if the instruments were trying to play themselves, bending and warping into strange shapes that didn't belong. He paused, leaning forward, his fingers hovering over the controls. His breath caught in his throat as a new sound emerged from the speakers, a haunting whisper so faint it could have been his imagination. But then it grew louder, clearer. Tim, Tim, Tim. Tom froze. He turned up the volume, half expecting to hear the usual playback of the remix, but instead the voice seemed to echo through the studio, swirling around him. His heart started to race, and he quickly switched off the speakers. The room fell silent, too silent. His hand trembled as he reached for his phone, but when he looked at the screen, there was nothing unusual. No missed calls, no messages, just the glowing reflection of his own face, pale and strained. He shook his head, laughing nervously at himself. It's just the stress, he told himself. Just the isolation. You've been working too long. But as he glanced back at the computer, something caught his eye. The waveform on the screen had shifted, distorted in a way that didn't make sense. It was almost as if something had overwritten the track while he wasn't looking. His fingers hovered over the keyboard again, but a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, slamming the window shut with a loud bang. Tom jerked back, his heart hammering in his chest. It wasn't supposed to be windy. The air outside was still. Shaking his head, he slowly approached the window. The streetlights outside cast long, stretching shadows across the pavement, but the night felt wrong. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, as if the world beyond the glass had stopped moving. He pulled the window open, and a chill swept through the room, cold enough to send a shiver down his spine. He turned back toward the computer, but the lights flickered overhead. There, on the screen, the waveform had changed again. This time, the track wasn't playing music. It was the sound of a door creaking open, a soft shuffle of footsteps, a low sigh, almost a whisper, and then a scream. Tom recoiled. He was sure he hadn't heard it before, not in the track. His fingers gripped the edge of the desk, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He stared at the screen, watching as the waveform writhed, as if it were alive, pulsating with an energy that felt unnatural. The air in the room was suffocating now, pressing in on him from all sides, and then a figure appeared in the corner of his vision, just beyond the shadows, in the doorway of the studio. His heart stopped, his eyes strained, trying to focus, but it was gone as soon as he blinked. Just a flicker of movement, a shadow that didn't belong. The temperature dropped again, colder this time, and Tom shuddered. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He yanked it out, his hands trembling as he glanced at the screen. "Are you hearing it too?" The message was from his colleague, Marcus, who was working on a separate project in another part of the city. Tom didn't even know how to respond. The room felt suffocating, and the whispers were louder now, more urgent, filling every corner of his mind. The studio door slammed shut behind him, and he jumped, spinning around to face it. It was locked. It had been locked the entire time. And then, the voice. "Tim, help me." It was unmistakable now. It wasn't just the track anymore. It was coming from somewhere deep within the walls, from somewhere close but far beyond reach. Tom's pulse pounded in his ears, drowning out everything else, and as he turned back toward the computer, he saw it. A new file had appeared on the desktop. It was titled, "Help Me." His hands trembled as he reached toward the mouse, but before he could click, the lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. The whispering grew louder, overwhelming him, the voice calling his name now, echoing in the room. "Tom, Tom." With a final, shuddering breath, he slammed his hand down on the keyboard. But there was no sound, no click, just the feeling of something cold brushing against the back of his neck. And then, nothing. Silence. But the whispers lingered just beyond the edge of hearing, as if Tim Bergling's presence had never left the room. And Tom knew that whatever had been in that track, whatever had followed him from the other side, was still watching, waiting for the next song.